The Sonic Truth, the Dynasty podcast that is all about fantasy and Dynasty and podcasting is here. We have to do an awkward introduction. There's no such thing as this show without getting awkward. We're getting awkward. We're getting fancy. We're getting frisky. On the Sonic Truth Dynasty podcast today with Theo Gremminger, of course, from PlayerProfiler, and joining us from the Undrafted podcast, which you can find on the PlayerProfiler network, Jax Falcone! Gentlemen,
I'm here.
We have some big movers in Dynasty the last few weeks. Fantasy playoffs are upon us. Some leagues still have trades open, which is always fun. What percentage of your leagues have trades open? That's an interesting question. But we should start with Puka Nacua, who established himself once and for all, I think once, again, and then for all, as the alpha in Los Angeles. Where should he be ranked in Dynasty?
Well, Jax, do you want to start out with this one, or should I take this one?
You go right ahead. I'm going to listen to you.
I mean, I think that he should be up there in like the top 5, top 6 for pretty much everybody. At the end of the day, this is an elite target earner and an elite touch getter. And the way that they're starting to use him is even more expansive than we ever saw during his rookie season. He had 5 rushing opportunities this past game, and he had a 46% target share. And what he's doing alongside of Cooper Kupp in an innovative offense with a head coach that knows how to get him the ball and has produced multiple wide receiver 1 seasons. For me, it's like Puka's in an excellent spot, Matt. And the biggest target competition he has is a player that's been hurt multiple times and is north of 30. So for me, Puka Nacua, what he's doing this year is even more impressive than what he did as a rookie, because he was able to come back off of the IR and elevate his game to this level. I think Puka's right there in like the Amon-Ra St. Brown, Malik Neighbors sort of range. He's not Jamar Chase. I'll take Jamar Chase over Puka Nacua all day long. I'm taking Justin Jefferson over Puka Nacua. And I'm still on CeeDee Lamb over Puka Nacua. I think Jax could maybe have a conversation about that one. But for me, I think that's sort of the Dynasty rankings right now. Nico Collins should absolutely be up somewhere in that mix. But Puka Nacua, for me, he's locked in. Tales of his demise were greatly exaggerated earlier in the season.
Ain't that the truth? I think you're right. I think when you look at Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, they sort of create a tier of their very own. Malik Neighbors is suffering bad quarterback play, but he's a stud. CeeDee Lamb has become a little bit quarterback proof down the stretch. I was kind of thinking that, we should be trading away CeeDee Lamb if you're a contender, because you can basically replicate him with a Puka Nacua plus maybe, if you were to make that trade. Although now CD may be just quarterback proof, just unbelievable. But I think he puts himself in that group, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra, and Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson continues to tantalize. I know we'll get to him a little later, but I think he's in that second tier. How you want to split those guys up, that's your call. But the only concern with Puka for me is he plays with reckless abandon, and injuries will probably persist.
He's healthy now. That's the thing, right? Yep. So what's so impressive and why I thought it was so noteworthy, this performance, I was like, well, this is on schedule for him for the first time being 100% healthy. So he's dealing with one injury after another, a knee injury, and he's coming back sooner than expected in some cases, and clearly not 100%, but working his way through it. Week in, week out, working his way through it. You can play through injuries and you can continue to rehabilitate. And then 3 weeks from when you came back originally from the high ankle sprain, you have finally regained all of your explosiveness. This tracks with when he would have regained full explosiveness at full health. And then he goes out and has like a close to 50% target share and gets 5 carries. And I'm like, wait, what is going on? This guy is a cross between Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel? Is this happening? That's what's so impressive. I'm like, okay, you win. Puka wins. Everybody, Puka touts win. Everybody wins. There's no room to fade him left. There's no case to fade him. There's no room to fade him left. You guys laid it all out. I mean, the wide receiver 5 spot is that's that ceiling that he's going to have to try to punch through. I'm sure some people are like, he's clearly a top 5 dynasty receiver. And from what I'm hearing from you guys is actually he's in that tier, but between Neighbors and St. Brown and Lamb, Wilson and Nacua, it's a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you can clearly see, though, from, his rookie season to now, he is a target earner without any question. That was the thing that he was doing, on a per route run basis in college. He was a little bit, clouded for us as a prospect because of the injuries and, not as much playing time, on the raw stats, but he was commanding targets in college, obviously commanded them out the gate as a rookie and certainly commanding them this year as well. And add in rushing. And the only concern maybe is the injury and quarterback. Hopefully Matt Stafford plays again next year. That'd be kind of nice. Don't you think, guys?
Matt Stafford absolutely. Was supposed to be done 2 years ago. Didn't Matt Stafford have a broken back and a broken neck?
Yes.
And 2 broken shoulders, and he was never going to play again? That was the narrative 2 years ago. And now he's back, and he's putting up big numbers, and they're like, hey, Josh Allen, come on over. Let's have a shootout. And it's like, no, yeah. With Matt Stafford, you could absolutely have Josh Allen visit and lock in a shootout. That's the type of quarterback that Matthew Stafford is. You can't say that about Kirk Cousins anymore. You can't say that about Aaron Rodgers. You can't say that about a lot of aging quarterbacks. But when another stud quarterback, elite quarterback, comes to visit the Rams with their secondary, you know it's on. You know it's going to be fireworks.
Yeah, I think that that was sort of the one knock on Nacua that I had heading into this season was this is a guy that needs 150 targets in order to highly produce. Unlike a guy like Jamar Chase, where he could be so efficient with something like 130 and get you there the same way. But that's sort of also the argument for a number of these guys sort of in that next tier, though. Wouldn't you agree on that, Jax? Where like Malik Neighbors needs a ton of targets. Amon-Ra St. Brown really had that wonderful touchdown streak, but he's sort of a guy that with the reputation of being a very high target earner. So it's really hard to poke holes in Nacua. And you're starting to see Nacua use, like Matt said, on these manufactured type touches. He's got 4 touchdowns in his last 4 games played. And that was something where last year we thought, could he take that next step as a touchdown scorer? And that's sort of what we saw with Amon-Ra St. Brown in year 3. And I think the game will continue to slow down for Nacua next year. And you could see him get to, a 12 touchdown season. This is the kind of guy with the way he's able to get open. He could be an absolute red zone killer in year 3.
Yeah, I mean, he had those rushing touchdowns in his final season in college, too. So we saw that coming as well. And, we sort of had the Robert Woods comp for him coming in. And, boy, he's blown past that. But, yeah, absolutely, man. He is unbelievable. So, yeah, I think that's a solved case. Lock it in, Puka Nacua. By the way, my 50% Dynasty share of Puka Nacua feeling very, very good right now. Just
so
FYI.
Have you traded any Puka Nacua?
Not really, no.
Well, I came on your show, Jax, your awesome Dynasty show. Highly recommend if anybody's not listening to it, make it part of your weekly rotation. But I was sitting there like, hey,
the Undrafted
going to miss the season. The Undrafted for sure, and everything you guys doing over at the Undroppables is
we're
really
going to put a
stuff.
link to the Undrafted podcast in the description of the show.
Our guy, the Undrafted, though, the Undrafted is it's just absolutely terrific. But I came on your show and I was kind of flexing my Puka Nacua and a third for Nico Collins trade when Puka was on the IR and Nico was on this trajectory with a wide receiver 1 overall season. Of course, I'm very happy to have Nico Collins on that team. But, if anything, I think that was a slight overpay, but you have to overpay when one guy's injured and one guy's not. So I think that was not a kill you type deal at all. Nico is a stud. But at the time, I was way more happy than I probably should have been in retrospect.
I'll take Puka now.
I think you're probably correct. I think Nico, though, like Nico, I could see being drafted higher in redraft next year. So I think like his outlook for next season will be extremely high if he closes up the season like I think he's going to. It's sort of a Julio Jones type final stat line if you projected over a 17-game streak. It's a great time for wide receivers. Next year, we've talked about this a little bit, Matt, how the narrative for next year could be sort of the revenge of the wide receiver with all the running back scoring this year. It's just shaping up where all the guys we've talked about in our top wide receiver are all in like that age where they should be in the primes of their careers, and they are. None of these guys are like, we're worried about them getting older and losing them. Like Jefferson, Chase, Lamb, all these guys are 25 and younger. It's just a remarkable time for quality wide receiver play.
In dynasty startups, in managed seasonal leagues, best ball, easily, right? Probably more than any best ball. Very difficult to get me off of, say, the top 10 dynasty receivers, because the dynasty receivers are the same guys you want in seasonal leagues too, right? Tough to dangle a running back in front of me and get me off one of those guys. It's just tough. It's going to be tough next year. And I'm going to end up going right back to 0 RB in all formats. And, I'm going to be pounding Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Puka, Amon-Ra, Garrett Wilson, Ladd McConkey, all these guys. I'm going to be going ham in the early rounds on these guys. And I'm going to force these running backs to stay healthy for another season. I'm going to force all the big running backs, because all the big running backs stayed healthy. It was just, you had the undersized backs like a Christian McCaffrey and, a handful of others going down. But I'm going to force the running backs to prove they can stay healthy for yet another full season. And I don't think they will. What do you think, Jax?
There's an important, concept that you're tiptoeing on right there, which is basically that I think it's been kind of proven, or at least this year, and I think it will be the case next year, that the optimal dynasty, construction of your roster is going to be stud wide receivers and depth at the running back position, because, Bucky Irving, Joe Mixon, Kareem Hunt, Isaac Guerrero, all these guys that are going off, and nobody
Chase Brown, dude.
Chase Brown,
Rico Dowdle.
Keep it going, right? Like, so if you have, just like if you're a start, 3 wide receiver with 2 or 3 flex, well then, okay, if you have 6 or 7 total wide receivers that are all basically awesome, that's all you need. You don't need Josh Reynolds and all these other guys behind him, right? You don't need those types of players exactly. You don't need those types of players on your roster, but to have a guy like, the fourth string running Patrick Taylor, all of a sudden is like, maybe Patrick Taylor is going to be an RB1 if Guerrero can't play. It's like absolutely nuts. So ultimately having depth and, a bunch of bullets in the chamber at running back is the way to play Dynasty for sure.
But all these guys staying healthy for the full season, Bijan, Kamara, go down the board, right? Playing the vast majority of games. Oh, Achane misses a game, right? But been largely healthy. And you have running backs, like even later round running backs that have been largely healthy. Think about, Aaron Jones missed what?
He missed
part of a game.
No.
Yeah, it was the London game. We thought we'd lose him.
He missed a part of a game. He actually just technically started every game, as far as I could tell. We talk about Mixon, and you go down the board, and Kyron Williams, James Cook. These guys are 200 pounds, and they're staying healthy for a full season. It's not going to happen again. I mean, I can tell you that is not going to happen again. Derrick Henry's been healthy. Saquon's been healthy. It's
James Cook.
Right. There's just a vast majority of these players. And Jonathan Taylor's missed a couple games.
But even still, you look at Kenneth Walker missed, J.K. Dobbins went down, Breece Hall, Christian McCaffrey. You still have to play the game with depth at running back because, look, I've got some Breece Hall teams right now that are sick to their stomach, because it's like ready to go. And all of a sudden, we talked about it on our show last week, me and Travis Seal about the Jets because there was I had joked there was a news report that said, don't worry, Aaron Rodgers is going to be starting this week. And I was like, wait, we're supposed to worry about that? I didn't know I had to worry about that. So they're basically.
Yeah. Don't worry. Cousins is playing.
Right. Wait, I have to worry? Wait, I should be worrying? So, ultimately what they're saying is there could be a shutdown in I almost said Green Bay because of Rodgers, but in New York with that whole team. I wouldn't put it past Devontae Adams to have a hamstring injury or something. And now Breece Hall out. And all of a sudden that team that's playing for nothing is going to play uninspired and might even shut some of their guys down, which is super scary for fantasy.
There's another guy, Josh Jacobs, top 50 pick in seasonal leagues, has been playing all season.
Been great.
Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery.
Great.
They haven't missed a game between them. Think about it. You keep going down the board. I can keep going and going and going. Tony Pollard, Najee Harris. No games missed. James Conner, maybe a game, right? So we're talking about, of all these guys, Aaron Jones, we're talking about a half a game or a game. Jonathan Taylor, 2 games. That's it. I think that's all we're talking. You can't even come up with a full season of games if you added up all the games missed without Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey off to the side. Because no one was drafting Christian McCaffrey.
Miles Sanders too.
At the 101, right? In seasonal leagues or in Dynasty, there's just not a lot of people listening to this show that are drafting a lot of Christian McCaffrey. So put him off to the side. Between the games that Kenneth Walker's missed, now we have a game missed for Breece Hall, a game by Achane, a game for Bucky Irving, a game for
I like
Mixon.
How we put Bucky Irving in that group, huh? Breece Hall.
I'm just talking about the list of all. The way you get to 17 games missed is Pacheco and a bunch of singular games from all the other running backs in the top 25 in Dynasty, excluding Christian McCaffrey. Think about that for a second. That is crazy durability that we've had. This is running back durability season, and this coming off season in Dynasty startups and in all formats, there is going to be this newfound rush to running back and a new appreciation of running backs like Saquon Barkley, like Josh Jacobs, and you can capitalize on that by simply not drafting them.
I think that there's also one thing that the both of you sort of touched on is when we talk about roster construction, you're still going to be able to fill your roster with guys that are instant starters when there's potential injuries on the roster, the guys like the Zach Charbonnets of the world that are just plug and play running backs, free square type running backs. Those guys are going to be easy to get. Chase Brown, 2-way ability running backs that when situations go right, they provide you a great deal of value. And Matt, you've also touched on sort of a broader discussion is the age apex has sort of been turned upside down this year. And one of the great values and discounts that next year you'll still be able to attain is some of these older running backs where people think they're just going to break down. This year, you've seen it with the NFL, Matt. I think Derrick Henry getting the contract in Baltimore and excelling kind of inspired New Orleans and Arizona to say, we're not going to let these 2 guys walk. We're just going to sign these guys and we're going to run them into the ground. James Conner now extended in Arizona. Alvin Kamara, 2 more years in New Orleans. And we don't want to spend up on older running backs, but you're always going to find in Dynasty that fantasy manager who runs it like an Excel sheet. And as soon as the guy hits a certain age, he's willing to give you a discount. You know these guys are in your league. And nowadays, I don't think the NFL cares as much about it. I don't think we should care as much about it. As long as we don't have to pay a premium price tag, you're still going to be able to find slightly older running backs who you can get great utility out of next season. Let somebody else, again, like Matt said, kind of pay up for the Saquons.
Right.
It's nice to have Saquon.
Can I give you a name?
Go for it.
Can I give you a name? I'll give you a hint. He's exactly 29 years old. He just celebrated with a birthday cake and everything, candles, his 29th birthday. And he's a guy you're going to want in Dynasty because he's going to be one of the more inexpensive yet super talented running backs who has less wear on the tires than you might think. His name is
Aaron Jones?
Nick Chubb.
Nick Chubb.
Nick Chubb in PPR Dynasty leagues, this guy is going to go where? Double-digit rounds. No one wants Nick Chubb. Aaron Jones is another one. Aaron Jones is a lightly raced race car, and he's going to be 30 years old. These guys are a similar age. I would say Aaron Jones. I would say James Conner because he has the contract, the one more year on the contract. He's 29. Yep. So we're talking about 3 players that are 29 or 30 that are going to be
cheap.
Super cheap.
Yep.
So if your running back roster, if your running back core in Dynasty is those 3 guys and then 3 elite handcuffs, a Jalen Wright, a Blake Corum, and some rookie, tell me that's a team you can't win with. Of course you can win with that team.
I think I didn't want this necessarily to turn into a lessons learned, but I think it's great to kind of discuss it when we're so fresh with the regular season that we've now seen it for 2 straight years where a guy signs as a free agent with a new team at the running back position, and the fantasy marketplace doesn't necessarily open their minds to just how positive this landing spot could have been. We saw it with David Montgomery. As soon as he lands in Detroit, his game takes off to another level. And then this year, it was sort of like it on steroids. Tony Pollard, like Matt said, had a second lease on life, and he's had a positive season. J.K. Dobbins, a second lease on life, and had a very positive run. Not to mention the Josh Jacobs, who's having he's going to end up with more touchdowns scored than his 2022 season, where he finished as the RB3 overall. And that's not even mentioning Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley. So, Matt, you mentioned Nick Chubb coming up. The guy that I'm keeping an eye on that I actually think is going to be, it was kind of the guy that we wanted to get rid of off of our Dynasty rosters for years. Najee Harris is going to get a second lease on life in free agency this summer. I think someone is going to sign Najee Harris, and I think there's multiple teams that are going to look at him as a guy who plays hurt, can handle volume, consistently runs for 1,000 yards, and Najee Harris, I think, is going to be an in-demand running back this summer, and it's one there where people have sort of punted him away in Dynasty. He's like an RB3 price tag, and I think he could have a David Montgomery-like outcome this summer. So free agent running backs, it's sort of like the transfer portal in college football. Free agent running back has become a thing, and I think we need to start embracing it more as Dynasty managers. This year, I mean, all these guys hit. All of the free agent running backs hit.
Jax, break the tie. Najee Harris or Travis Etienne in this build that we're talking about?
Najee Harris.
Yeah, Najee. But here's the thing. What about, Theo, you're in a couple of leagues with me. What are some of the things? To me, I look at action right now, because right now is a high leverage point for basically every Dynasty player. And even the Dynasty managers who are not in the playoffs, even maybe more so, because you guys can talk about the running backs and who's good, who's not, but how do you transact? Because I think you've maybe seen me make a couple of moves. I know I can talk about some of the moves I've made, but what are some of the moves you're making right now in and around these realities that we're talking about?
Well, that's sort of a show-sheet question. I'd say the majority of my leagues, FFPC, there's no trading for me. So the moves that I'm making are strictly waiver wire. But I do think that you're starting to see people really trying to bat down the hatches. I think there was a lot of trades, Jax, for James Conner, and a lot of trades for Tony Pollard. Those were sort of the two older running backs where I had Scott Connor on Dynasty Life a few days before the FFPC trade deadline. We talked about both of those guys as sort of nobody really cares about paying up for them. And if you're not going to make the playoffs, you kind of want to get them off your roster. Where next year you might have said, hey, I really wish I might have kept James Conner and kept Tony Pollard for like that random draft pick that I gave him up for, because both of those guys, again, the teams they're with have shown you exactly what you think of them with the sort of contracts they've received, and their quality of play has been very high. And in Tony Pollard's case, he's been able to produce on a terrible offense, which is something where Tennessee doesn't have to become a top 10 offense next year, but if they can simply become a top 15 offense, then he's sort of in good shape. So I think those
Tony
two guys,
Pollard was the first of the running backs that I thought of. But then I look where we have him in the rankings, and I was like, well, he's going to be too expensive next year. Then I looked at his schedule, and I was like, well, he's definitely going to be too expensive next year. I was looking for the discount bin running backs. The problem is everybody knows Tony Pollard signed a 3-year deal, which is actually a 2-year deal. He's going to be back next year. Spears will be back as that meat shield, so there's not going to be much incentive for the Titans to go out and draft a running back. So he's going to be right back in this total bell cow role, and he will have finished strong in 2024. I actually think that Tony Pollard's his ADP in startups will be a little bit higher than he is showing in the rankings right now, and I might actually pass on him where I think he's going to get drafted. There's going to be a newfound appreciation of Tony Pollard as the month closes out and the season starts in 2025, because he's pretty locked in, and he's still young, and he's an all-purpose back. So if you have him now, do not trade him. Hold on to him, because he's only going to accrue value. And but yeah, if you're in a startup and you can get him, a round or two ADP discount, got to draft him.
And I'll kick it over to you, Jax, but I wanted to throw out two other names and see sort of your reaction to not only Connor and Pollard, but there was also, and this is not like a injury victory lapping situation, but I think there were fantasy managers who viewed that bye week for Carolina, where Jonathan Brooks was coming back, as their sell high window to sell Chuba Hubbard, and there was some people selling him after the contract. And it was sort of a situation where you're able to buy running back utility. You're able to certainly buy RB2 value, high-end RB2 value for like an RB3 price. I saw that in one or two places. And the other guy that I think is interesting to get your opinion on, Jax, where there were certain managers, and I think really, really sharp ones that I saw, that were willing to trade Tyrone Tracy because he's 25 years old and he was a day 3 guy, and they think maybe they're selling him at the peak of his dynasty value, where for me, I sort of viewed Tracy as a buy because of his profile. And I think the difference between a 23-year-old and a 25-year-old really doesn't mean anything to me when you take into consideration the lack of wear and tear on his body, playing the position for only a short period of time. So interested to hear your thoughts on Hubbard and Tracy as well, Jax.
I literally just during this last week made a deal for James Conner. I'm a bye week team, so I sent my second, which should be of course a back 4. The back 4 spots. 212 exactly. Thank you. I didn't want to. But so the 212, I sent the 212 for James Conner. But seriously, and I made an offer for Pollard. I also just made an offer this morning for Chuba Hubbard in a league where I'm trying to compete. So yeah, I'm with all those things. I do think Tyrone Tracy.
You're going to get rejected, by the way. No one's going to fall for that shit. Think they're going to let you have Hubbard?
It's funny because you were asking about Rico Dowdle, and my thought process on Dowdle is I don't want to pay a second, and no one's taking a third. So he finds himself in a spot where I think the price I have to pay, I'd rather try and quote unquote pay up for a guy like Chuba Hubbard or James Conner, who I feel a little bit better about having a role next year And, so that's just the way I feel about that sort of Dowdle situation. I think Dowdle goes back in the box next year. If, I mean, they got to draft a running back. So I think at least 50-50. Whereas, like you say, Connor and, the others, I mean, especially Chuba right now, Chuba's got a perfect runway because Brooks, I mean, we can cry about it. I mean, it's just awful, but he goes back on the shelf and who knows how long it's going to take him to get back.
Well, it's the second torn ACL.
Same one too. Yeah.
Awful. Same one. And it's sort of bringing into question, why were they playing him this season? I know that people are saying that. I know Cardi Carpentier was talking about that. He covers Texas stuff now, but Brooks' situation is terrible. Yep. But at the end of the day, the argument was Carolina showed you what they thought of Chuba Hubbard with the contract they gave him. We have seen multiple backfields sort of thrive playing alongside of one another. You look at what Detroit's done with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. And I think teams are going to sort of copy this model where you can sort of protect a not fantastic quarterback situation with running backs. And I know it's not necessarily the way that Matt Kelly or Anand Nanduri would run an NFL team, but I do think it's a copycat league, and you're going to see certain teams valuing the position a little bit more when it comes to having multiple backs that they believe in.
It's also the worst thing that could have happened for optimal roster construction at the NFL level for real football is what's happening in Detroit. Everyone's going to copy the Detroit template, and yes, please, by all means, copy the Detroit template, except the whole we need two running backs that are both expensive. One is a first-round pick. The other we signed in free agency. You don't need to do that. You could just one of those two is just fine. Just one, but now that's going to be the new template.
I will say, though, what they're paying these running backs as a percentage of the cap is way, way less than it was 10 years ago, too. So the idea that you don't want to, quote unquote, pay up for running backs no longer means what it meant when we were saying don't do that. So they can actually, quote unquote, pay up. If they're paying them $10 million, they used to be paying these guys $20 million when the cap was, half of what it was. So, I mean, it's a whole better buy now, less guaranteed money, the whole thing, right? I mean, the contract that Le'Veon Bell turned down, no one is being offered at all in the league,
3 years, $18 million, $11 million guaranteed for David Montgomery.
Nothing.
That's nothing. Now, that's a good deal. As a percent of the cap, this year, 2.66%.
Right.
Okay. Again, that is nothing. That is nothing.
So that's great. Do that as an NFL team, right? Why
that's
not?
Right. That's right. Yeah. But you don't have to see. The thing is, it's sort of the reverse problem that Atlanta found themselves in. Right. It was the reverse mistake of Atlanta, where Atlanta, you draft the quarterback and fuck Kirk Cousins. Okay, and just roll with Penix this year. That's what they should have done. And they should be doing it right now, and they're still making excuses, and they're still saying Kirk Cousins are a quarterback. I don't understand this. Makes no sense to me. You do you, Atlanta. Big mistake. Detroit's the opposite. At running back, you're not drafting a running back in the first round. If you pick these guys off of free agency. If they're great deals, then their backfield should be David Montgomery and Aaron Jones. That should be, if you want to do that backfield, do that.
Yeah, I mean,
but speaking of Minnesota and this quarterback situation, Sam Darnold is the new Kirk Cousins. You would agree with that? Do we agree with that? Because that's my position. I believe he's the new Kirk Cousins, and they're basically Minnesota is going to have to be super courageous in letting Cousins walk, and now they're going to have to look at their fan base at whatever they are, 11-2, and say we're letting Darnold walk, which I think is even harder than letting Cousins walk. What do you think they should do? What do you think is going to happen? What does that mean for J.J. McCarthy?
Jax, I'll take this one. I'll kick it over to you right after. I think, Matt, that he's actually going to get, I think it's going to be something like a Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith type contract for Darnold when somebody signs him this offseason. I'll say that for me, Minnesota, acquiring Daniel Jones, I think that was a bridge quarterback for JJ McCarthy, where they can start Daniel Jones for 2-3 games, then hand the reins over to McCarthy. You have the value of the rookie contract, the San Francisco model. That's probably what's going to happen, and you'll see Sam Darnold quarterbacking a team like the New York Giants next year. But for me, I think, Matt, the great equalizer will be, can Sam Darnold take them to a place in the NFC playoffs that is so deep that they're going to have the internal pressure to go ahead and sort of botch that idea and continue using him? The guy's got 28 touchdown passes and only 10 interceptions. He's thriving in this offense. He's got relative youth, and Minnesota has really exceeded expectations. So I think if they can make the NFC title game with Darnold, then I'm not sure if they go like the Alex Smith Kansas City route and turn the reins over to McCarthy. Anything less, I think it's almost a done deal. They're going to go with the rookie contract. They're going to go with JJ McCarthy, a player they greatly value, a player that people are very high on in this draft class. He's got mobility, and he also was a mega winner in college as well. So I think they're ready to turn the reins over unless Darnold makes this great run. Where are you at, Jax?
I basically agree with everything you just said. I think that the right thing for them to do is to move on from Darnold, and they will. The only thing that makes it difficult is if he makes
they will?
Yes.
And they will. Just because it's the right thing to do? This is the NFL.
Look, I get my Minnesota sort of information and what I think will happen from Thor Nystrom. So, I'm watching Thor. I think he thinks that they're going to move on from Sam Darnold, that they really do love JJ McCarthy. So I say they will as not knowing, but I think they will, unless they are, unless Darnold brings them to a Super Bowl. If they win or lose the Super Bowl,
what if they win one playoff game?
I don't think that drives the needle. I think that this team needs to make – I think the NFC title game, Matt, if they get to the NFC title game and let's say they lose 35-30 to Detroit, or they lose 28-27 to Philadelphia, and it's some heartbreaking loss and Darnold plays great, then I could see an internal pressure from the fan base. But this is also, like you said, Matt, an organization that moved on from Kirk Cousins. They moved on from Kirk Cousins. The last time he was on the field for them, he was leading the NFL in touchdown passes. Of course, you have the injury mixed in there. But Darnold was always sort of a bridge quarterback. They brought him in this year on a cheap contract, and nobody was that excited about it. But again, no one gets more quarterback value out of guys than Minnesota. You've seen
AOC.
Multiple players. You've had
this is the take. You got Dobbs, Mullins, this whole thing, and I think they're seeing. Hey, if a guy like Darnold, who has 6 years or 7 years of subpar, 60% completion percentage, all the rest of it, then this year is so good.
Yeah.
Why won't our guy that we absolutely love, JJ McCarthy, who we can pay on a rookie schedule, schedule, and build around him? Why can't he do this? And so that's got to be the calculus here.
I just had an aha moment.
A lot of people do while I'm talking.
So many teams do so much damage to their franchise, to their roster, with coach worship, attributing success to the coach. How many teams have been just ravaged by that? Like the talent is just completely turned over because, hey, we don't need player X or player Y. We have coach X. Right?
So no, your take then, Podfather, is that Sam Darnold
this is the exception.
So good.
Here we go. No. This is the exception. This is why this is so cool. This could be the great example of coach worship saving a franchise, where they can pitch the narrative to the fan base that this isn't about Darnold. This is the system. Let Darnold walk. Don't worry. We do this. That's what we do here. This is our system. We get the most out of quarterbacks, and then we move on to the next one. And McCarthy will be even better in our system with our coaches Don't you worry, little fans. That's what they're going to do. This could actually be one of the rare occasions where coach worship and just coach-centric analysis actually helps the team situation.
Kevin O'Connell quarterbacks, Kyle Shanahan running backs, Sean McVay wide receivers, plug and play.
Undefeated. But listen, here's the question, Matt. Sam Darnold is the what best quarterback in the league? Like the 10th, 15th, 20th, 30th? Where is he in your just sort of general, I think he's that good a quarterback, benign of the team, just in general?
Well, we have
Well,
okay.
No, that's
if he's 27 years old, then we should just be able to go to the Dynasty rankings, right? If he's 27, we got to go to the Dynasty rankings.
What we think of his talent.
Okay, this is what we'll do. We're going to go to the Dynasty rankings, but we will discount the young quarterbacks who are struggling but still have a chance to turn things around. So if you just eliminate Bryce Young and you eliminate Anthony Richardson, then Sam Darnold on talent.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no. But then you also have to move up Matthew Stafford because you have to move up
Smith,
the old quarterbacks.
Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff.
Hold on. Don't worry. Most of those guys, as long as they have a couple of years left, are going to be higher in the Dynasty rankings than you might think because we base it on a 3-year window. All those guys are already higher than Sam Darnold in Dynasty. Don't worry. So if we just move up just Matthew Stafford, and then I ask you a question. I'll ask you one question to get to the answer. Do you think that Sam Darnold's better right now? If you had to go win an NFL game, would you rather have Sam Darnold or Russell Wilson?
Close.
Theo?
Theo?
It's close. Russell Wilson's like I think if we gave Russell Wilson, Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, and Jordan Addison, opposed to his George Pickens-less team he's got last week on the field, he might do pretty well too.
Okay, so let's just say, well, then this proves my point. Because if you kick Anthony Richardson and Bryce Young out and you move up the two age-adjusted older quarterbacks in Russell Wilson and Matthew Stafford, now, Russell Wilson, he's only 36, but we would agree that he's on the way out, right? He's on the decline.
Sure.
Then it's exactly where we have him in Dynasty. Then Sam Darnold, his Dynasty ranking right now is exactly where he stacks up in terms of the talent ranking in the NFL at quarterback. Sam Darnold is definitively QB 24.
Okay, so here's the question. You're going to pay a big contract to the 20th best quarterback in the NFL?
No.
Right.
No.
So the right thing to do, this isn't a JJ McCarthy.
Of course I wouldn't do that. It would be insane for them to bring him back at some big bloated contract. Cleveland are so stupid for having to pay all this dead money to Deshaun Watson. So the last thing you want to do is pay a bunch of dead money to a quarterback you don't need.
Bingo. Okay, we agree then.
Which is why signing Kirk Cousins, if you intended to draft a quarterback that was 23 years old already and could play right away, was idiotic. Okay? So if they bring back Darnold, that would also be idiotic. But as clear and obvious as that is to me, I've seen a lot of things in this league, Jax. I've seen a lot of moves, and I've seen one playoff win break brains.
How about the Joe Flacco contract after the Super Bowl? Could we have one of those situations on our hands? That would be the best. If he wins the Super Bowl and they just, boom, give him the contract. Or if they win the Super Bowl and they let him go.
That's what I'm talking about. It's also interesting in Dynasty what you do with players who tear ACLs in their rookie year. So we should circle back and answer this question first, and then we'll get to JJ McCarthy. But what do you do with Jonathan Brooks? You have Jonathan Brooks. Okay, he is on your IR spot in Dynasty. The season ends. It's mid-January. You would really like to create a package to maybe go up and get a first rounder or there's a player you want to trade for. What are you doing with Jonathan Brooks? Because you know that Chuba Hubbard has this new contract. and the history of players coming back from tearing the same ligament 2 consecutive years is terrifying. What do you do?
If you want to pay up for my Jonathan Brooks shares right now, I'll sell them to you. I think that it's sort of the one argument.
Second
would be,
rounder?
How high a second? If you tell me I can get Nick Singleton from Penn State right now, that sort of level of player as like a re-roll from the pick that I made.
Oh, let's call it a 12-team league, the 203 in Superflex.
I'll take it.
I'm taking that. I'll take it.
And better take it. You sure as hell better take it.
You also have Chuba Hubbard there, who's a successful back. So I have 2 hurdles now for Jonathan Brooks he needs to overcome. Jonathan Brooks needs to overcome recovering from a massive injury, his second massive injury on the same knee. And let's say he does go like J.K. Dobbins and bounces back extremely well. Then he's got to come back and he's got to take touches away from a back who just had a borderline RB1 season, and Dave Canales continually sings his praises, and the team just made a top 10 paid running back. So I believe fully in Jonathan Brooks last year as sort of a transformative dynasty asset, but we need to react to what the situation is right now. And if this is a very strong running back, not to get too, we'll have plenty of that. I know people can't wait to hear us. Matt and I in January will do plenty of shows where we're going to talk about this 2025 class, but just as a bird's eye view, I want running backs from the 2025 class. I want tight ends from the 2025 class. I think those are the 2 positions of strength. And if I have a dynasty roster that needs a running back, Matt, with Jonathan Brooks, I'm going to have to hold a guy who's going to be injured again to start next season versus a guy in that second round that I'm going to be able to get that's a day 2 pick with some juice from a class that I really, really like. I'm making that deal all day long.
When you think about where valuations will be, the time to trade for Jonathan Brooks might be into the 2025 season. At some point, perhaps even early in the 2025 season, it's going to become apparent that he's not coming back in 2025. It's going to be a total loss season, that he has this extended recovery because it was late. I mean, he tore the ACL again in December. If it's me and I'm Carolina and I have Chuba Hubbard, no expectations that he comes back. I think that's a guy you trade for in the season, like say week 5 of 2025. At that point, I'm going to start getting interested in Jonathan Brooks because medical technology in a way that, okay, it was a repair the first time, then the second time they swap it out with a cadaver. There's all kinds of ways that they can do it a second time, and actually it's not that much of a degradation. The recovery will be longer, but when he is back and he is healthy and it is the start of training camp in 2026, you're going to want to have Jonathan Brooks. I think that would be he's a top 25 running back talent right now in the league. And you want that guy in Dynasty. All of our Dynasty rosters, every Dynasty team I've ever had, there's dead roster spots with just guys you're carrying because they're super fringe running backs and there's a chance. I think Jax said Patrick Taylor. That guy in a taxi squad might as well be Jonathan Brooks. That's an upgrade on your taxi squad over anyone else that could be on there. What about J.J. McCarthy?
I will take J.J. McCarthy. I still, my opinion of J.J. McCarthy didn't change. I think that if J.J. McCarthy were eligible in this particular draft class, we'd be having a conversation of J.J. McCarthy versus Cam Ward versus Shadur Sanders, and I think we'd be leaning towards J.J. McCarthy. J.J. McCarthy has the cleanest profile of these guys, and when it comes down to mobility, J.J. McCarthy is if we lined all 3 of those guys up and we had them run a sprint, I'll take J.J. McCarthy in the 40 over both those guys. So I like Ward. I've talked about that. I like Sanders, but I think McCarthy was a guy that we saw win a national title, extreme mobility, was a run-first offense, but he was also just a mega winner and a guy that certain analysts who we respect, I mean, Jax, you brought up Thor Nystrom. Like, I know Thor Nystrom, I know Brett Whitefield. There was a couple people who had J.J. McCarthy like ahead of Drake May in this class, and I don't think anyone would have had Ward and Sanders ahead of Drake May if we were sort of comparing last year and this year. So I'm of the opinion that McCarthy, Matt, is a guy you want to go out and buy when you have the opportunity to, because like Jax said, and like you have even capitulated to, the Kevin O'Connell quarterback position, we've seen Josh Dobbs provide multiple weeks of QB1. Sam Darnold has 28-10 touchdown interception ratio. Kirk Cousins, multiple seasons of success. Nick Mullins passed for 400 yards like twice in this offense. So I think J.J. McCarthy could be the one where it sort of combines some of the positive traits for all of those guys. And he's young. And the mobility with McCarthy, that's sort of the X factor for him. Do they give him some manufactured rushing attempts that we sort of saw with Dobbs? I think they could. He's mobile. So I don't know. Where are you at, Jax?
I think Matt Kelly is just shocked with that capitulation point you made there. I think he's
that word really blew my
mind.
Because if you said I'd capitulate to Justin Jefferson being the reason for all the quarterback success there, but that's not what you're saying. Kevin O'Connell, no, thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and point to Justin Jefferson as the reason. But Jax, I have JJ McCarthy as a must draft, must acquire player, especially in Superflex.
The problem with JJ and Penix is that both of them, whomever the manager is that holds those two, there's a FOMO there. They don't want to trade them away because they've never seen them play. They're sort of still projecting them as their best case scenario is in their mind, not the worst case scenario. So you really have to pay up. So if you're going to buy,
that's so interesting. That's an interesting point and an interesting difference between startups and trading.
Yes.
With those particular players, and you'll find this eventually when you go to try to trade for Jonathan Brooks in a year or 9 months, okay, is that when you're invested in a player who has not been playing and you've been the believer in his recovery or in his ability in spite of the team not promoting him, then you're more dug in. You have more of that confirmation of your own scouting profile, and you're not going to let that go. You're just it's a hand that you refuse to fold, but if you were redealing the deck, you wouldn't value that player that highly. That's player correct. You might not draft in a startup at a particular spot, but when offered a trade of a player you would have drafted over that guy in a startup,
you won't take it.
You're locked in. No way. You're going to reject that trade. But in a startup, that's where I'm going to be circling. I mean,
absolutely.
I can't wait to do startups in 2025 in Superflex and try to get both Penix and McCarthy.
Yeah, and maybe even the smaller Neeks, the Knicks without the P.
Oh yeah, Knicks. Give me a little bow as well. A little pay
bow
up
Neeks,
for
all sophomore quarterbacks. Imagine if you had a roster in Superflex with 3 sophomore quarterbacks. I would feel great about it. I'd be like, "This is it. Let's go."
Here's the question I have for you, Matt. Is Drake May the quarterback one of that class over Jaden Daniels?
No, but he's clearly the QB2.
There we go.
He's clearly the QB2. If it's me, the startup test works perfectly here. If I have to pick Caleb Williams or Drake May or Bo Nix or Michael Penix, the guy that checks all the boxes for me, the guy that has the least uncertainty but also the upside, and now I'm hearing, the Patriots, they're getting ready for a Godfather offer to T. Higgins.
Yep.
You love to hear that.
Yes.
Because Theo is convinced they're going to go wide receiver in the draft, right, Theo?
I think they could do both, though, guys.
That's the thing.
I think they could do both.
That's the thing. Overnight, suddenly he goes from Bourne and Pop and Polk and
to T. Higgins and Travis Hunter.
To Travis
T.
Hunter.
T. Higgins and
Higgins. And then you play Pop Douglas in the slot. Perfect. Great.
Yep.
Terrific.
So last night after Monday Night Football, Joe Burrow in the post-game press conference made a point about how they're going to do everything that they can to re-sign T. Higgins. There's starting to be a little bit of a narrative, at least inside the team, and sort of pressure to get it done for the Bengals. And T's been playing just terrific football this season on a per game basis. So I do think that there's going to be an effort by Cincinnati to get it done. I think if T would have just sort of been a middling guy this year, I think that ship would have completely sailed, and it would have been just like, let's separate. I do think there'll be a little bit of a pressure here, but I think T Higgins, when you start looking at the teams that are going to pay up for T, New England is certainly one of them. And he's shown this year in terms of his target share and the amount of targets he's handled per game that this is a guy who could go and become a 150 target guy next year in the right situation. It's great for Dynasty. And if you give me T Higgins attached to Drake May, wheels up for both of those guys. But I do think it's a double tap situation, Matt. I think New England realizes what they have in Drake May. I think that they still need to address the offensive line, but do they address the offensive line with a top 5 pick, or do they take Tet McMillan with a top 5 pick and sign a bunch of free agents like Carolina did this year? Carolina fixes their offensive line this year through free agency. New England could do that. New England has a ton of cap space.
Yeah.
So signing T Higgins, signing offensive linemen, and drafting a skill position player in the top 10 picks, they could even slightly trade down potentially and get one of those guys. I think that's sort of the writing on the wall. There's a few wide receivers in the draft, and T Higgins stands out sort of like a sore thumb in free agency.
Yeah.
Agreed.
If you think that New England signing T Higgins would decrease the probability they go receiver in the draft, well, you're doing it wrong. If you're one of these mock drafters and you had them going Tet McMillan, and then when they sign T Higgins, you're like, okay, I'm gonna give him an offensive lineman. No, don't do that. They're gonna go all in on supporting Drake May with weapons. That's how they think. They think that getting neighbors supports the quarterback more than getting Joe Alt. That's how these teams think. Even though we know that is probably the way to go. It would be the offensive lineman. If it were me and I were building the team, I wouldn't draft a receiver and I wouldn't sign T Higgins. I'd do neither. That's not how I would do it, but we're thinking with game theory about how NFL teams will operate, and they're going to go all in to support their quarterback. And if you have Drake May in Dynasty, that's what you want to hear. That's perfect. And yeah, I want to hear the case for Caleb over Drake May. That's what I'm interested in. I want to hear that case because I can't figure it out. I mean, you're just chasing a name brand. You're chasing college football at that point because I think that it's over. I think it's been decided. I still like Caleb Williams. Mm-hmm. I would still consider drafting him. I still think that there's a high probability that he breaks out in the NFL and he has a very productive career. He's a big-time dynasty asset. But what Drake May brings to the table and what he's done this year with no weapons is so impressive that you can't look past it. So, and I know what's going to happen in startups is that name brand is going to carry the day with Caleb Williams, and you're just not going to get the price that you want. In trade or in startups, I doubt many people that leverage the Player Profiler Dynasty rankings, and you can check out the Dynasty rankings. In fact, we have a special. The all-in package for the rest of December is available for only $25. Player Profiler all-in package. You get it through the Super Bowl. $25 with code SANTA. The code is SANTA. I like that code. That's a fun code.
It's great. It's a great code. It's a great code.
Well, we had another code earlier in the year for Halloween. Boo. BOO. And this is up there with Boo, I think. Now, you want to use Santa because of the way the season, we're only a few weeks left, you're going to get a better deal with code Santa. So I would use code Santa, check out the Dynasty rankings, and you can toggle to superflex. You can toggle into win now mode versus productive struggle mode. So you can say, okay, what's the rebuild valuation versus the win now valuation on all these players. I think it's pretty cool. So Theo, would you go? We know you'd go May over Caleb, right?
Yeah.
What about Bo Nix. Would you go Bo Nix over, say, Penix?
Yes. I think Bo Nix right now is still sort of underrated by the community. It's the one player where, Jax, I mean, I really interested to hear your take on this, but it's sort of like the George Pickens haters, where they're going to try to poke holes in his game using obscure metrics to tell me what I'm not seeing on what I'm seeing on the screen is actually not true, that this guy's actually not that talented. And the reason that he's successful is because he's got this great offensive line that allows him to hold on the ball a little bit extra in the pocket, that he takes more shots downfield. Therefore, these big completions don't matter as much. It's so much noise. This guy has mobility. This guy has the ability to win NFL games. I've seen him have multiple 4-touchdown performances, and he's been able to win with his arm and win with his legs. And this Denver Broncos team has nothing. We talk about Drake May. Bo Nix is Drake May with a better offensive line and Cortland Sutton. There's nothing there. I'll take Ramondre Stevenson over any single running back on Denver. And besides Cortland Sutton, there's no skill position player that puts any sort of fear in opposing secondaries. And Cortland Sutton's going to have his best season ever as a pro attached to Bo Nix. So for me, Bo Nix is still criminally underrated. I'll be interested to see how everything sort of shakes out next year. But I would go ahead and bet that I'm going to have some Bo Nix in Dynasty startups, because I don't think the market's going to fully move with him. And he's certainly not going to be valued like a guy who finishes as a QB1 as a rookie. I have nothing but positive things to say about Bo Nix. Where are you at, Jax?
So right now I have Bo Nix as my quarterback 13 in Dynasty and Penix 19. And so, yeah, if you ask me right now, of course I have Nix ahead, but I think that's going to tighten, especially when, 2025 starts. If and when we see Michael Penix play this year, which I think all three of us have been expecting that. I mean, after week 1, I was like, we're going to see Penix pretty soon, because Cousins was so bad in week 1. And then he got hot. But lately he's been terrible. I think you pointed out the stat, Theo, 0 touchdowns, 8 picks in his last 3 or 4 games. Like, it's just so bad.
It's just horrible.
Yeah, there was the stat, ESPN Analytics or whatever, the throw velocity thing. He was the first player in league history.
No, that was a made up stat. I think that was a Hayden Winks one, and then he followed up with this stat was made up. I'm pretty sure.
Dude, I heard it. Like,
oh my God,
places.
Jax got trolled.
No.
Dude,
actually, Jax, you're right. So how long have they had the 35 mile an hour thing? He's the only quarterback to not have a 35 mile an hour throw. How far back have they gone with that?
I don't know, but I heard that on ETR. I heard that on a number of places. I did not.
So then
see
maybe
it.
I'm off on.
I only heard it on other pods, so I have no clue if that's right. But I will tell you, I did watch the game, and it's the first time in NFL history I saw a guy throw a balloon ball every single time he threw it. The stat makes sense, which is bad enough, and it implies what we're getting at is that that final pick that he threw was one of the worst throws I have ever seen from an NFL quarterback. It just was laid out there. I mean, so right now with Cousins playing as bad as he is and them still being in the driver's seat for the division, Atlanta's got a tough decision. And
they're not in the driver's seat; they're a game back.
Yeah. But I mean, they control their own destiny.
They're very much in it.
Yes,
and they're trying to make the playoffs. They have a win now team that they've created.
Yes.
Of course, they need to be putting their best chance of winning on the field at every position. Does that worry you at all about Penix? That are they seeing something behind the scenes that they can't pull the trigger?
I think it's super difficult. I think it's super difficult to go. Look, put it this way: once you go to Michael Penix, it's going to be nearly impossible to go back to Cousins and still hold it all together.
Oh, no, we can't go back to Cousins.
You know what I'm saying?
I know, but it's just so crazy. If he's anything, you have to go to him.
I think so.
It worries me more, actually, and a guy that I was really excited about the hire, but it worries me more about Raheem Morris, who showed that he is a veteran deference guy, who's afraid to move off of this really, really struggling veteran, because this is a guy, I mean, and guys, we don't always know the way things operate in the NFL, where inside the locker room, this could be a team that's fully committed to Kirk Cousins. Cousins is obviously an older guy but you don't know what kind of operates with these sort of decisions. But it's a 6-7 team. It's a 6-7 team, guys. It's a team that they're right there in multiple games, despite having this really terrible quarterback play. And if you simply remove the 2 Tampa Bay games out of Kirk Cousins' stats this year, then he's one of the worst quarterback in football. He somehow had 8 touchdown passes against Tampa Bay in those 2 games. Other than that, it's been few and far between for like impactful performances. And you think of all the close losses that they've had this year. So for me, I'm kind of surprised that you have a top 10 quarterback that organizationally, Atlanta went out and told everybody that they had Michael Penix as like the number 3 player in this entire draft class. And they're unwilling to use him over Kirk Cousins. It says a little bit more to me about the head coach than it necessarily does about Penix. And there's all these stories coming out, being leaked by certain people saying like how much the Falcons love Penix. Sports Illustrated did an article last week. And I thought that was going to be, give Kirk Cousins his start in Minnesota. Don't bench him against his former team. Give him an opportunity to win that game. And if he fails, then you make the switch. And in fact, you're seeing Raheem Morris come out this week and say that they have no plans to make the switch. To me, it's sort of, why is Raheem Morris so committed to Kirk Cousins? I think it's a veterans deference thing. That's just my opinion. I could be completely wrong. I'm hoping that we see Michael Penix, because this is a team that has a lot of juice. I mean, we really like Bijan Robinson, tremendous player, Drake London, and then the other 2 wide receivers, Mooney and Ray McLeod, have both been playing at a very high level. I think that Penix could step in and be so good right away that people are like, why didn't they make the switch in week 6?
Well, let's put it this way. Jalen Polk is the worst rated offensive wide receiver in the league, according to PFF, I believe, or something like that. He's been awful. Jalen McMillan's okay. Rome Odunze has underwhelmed, yet they all were propped up by the best quarterback in the college game. This Michael Penix.
This is why he's on the show right here.
Felix Sharp had been singing about Michael Penix. This is why.
That is a great point.
Yep. Michael Penix is a legit outside the numbers thrower. I think he could revitalize a lot of things in that offense, and they are crazy not to play him, especially given how bad Cousins is. I think you nailed it though, Theo. I think it comes down to like, it's easy for us to say. It's hard when you're so close to it and you paid a guy $100 million. His agent, that Cousins agent, is there like pressuring the front office, and you're like, don't you fucking dare go away from this guy, because there's so much pressure other than just the logical, obvious thing that Penix should be playing. And I think a lot of that gets wrapped up into the decision-making. And I think that's why Cousins is still playing, because he has been awful.
And to pile on to your pro Penix argument, Kalen DeBoer missed the college football playoffs, and he's 9-3 at Alabama. The two of us could take over the Alabama job this year and could have gone 9-3 getting off the couch. That's not a place you want to lose 3 regular season games at.
Bingo.
So go Penix.
That's great. It's great coach analysis. Okay. So
hey, we're all coach peak. Today's all coach.
That's very, very coach centric.
Matt Kelly loves it.
Yeah. Okay. Anthony Richardson or Michael Penix?
That's a really tough one. Part of me wants to say Anthony Richardson, because I think as long as Anthony Richardson's starting an NFL game, we've seen sort of what a rushing spike week looks like for Anthony Richardson. And I think Michael Penix is going to be a guy that's going to have to rely on the number of touchdown passes that he has. I think that's sort of it for me. Richardson, since he's come back after the benching, has looked much better running the football, and he's taken more opportunities as a scrambler. So for me, I'm going to stick to my guns here, and I'm going to go with Anthony Richardson, even though it seems like you could make an argument for both here. Where you at?
Matt, I would ask you, I said that Nix is my quarterback 13, Penix is my quarterback 19. I ask you, where do you think Anthony Richardson is? I'll give you one guess.
I'll say he's quarterback 18
20.
for you.
Yes! My guy, Matt, quarterback 20. I would re-roll Anthony now, and I think you can maybe even get a little bit of
You did it. You did it. I'm good at this.
Proud of you.
I felt proud of me. Thank you, man. Yeah, that's about right. I think QB 20 is about right. I think he's just one of these guys that's going to continue to leak value unless he has to have some game where the completion percentage is off the charts and the coach speak is off the charts and everything's off the charts. And then maybe, I mean, you think he's on that road when he goes to New York and has such a great game against the Jets, and then no, right? And then it all reverts back to the mean the very next week, and it's like I can't do it with this guy. I can't do it with this guy. I'm not going to be buying. This is not a guy that I have on my list for 2025 startups for Superflex. Not doing it. Especially in Superflex. There's so much at stake at quarterback. The last thing you want is to have this guy on your Superflex roster. Single quarterback, I can see it.
2 top 10 weeks in his last 3, and 2 wins and 1 loss. And the 1 loss was to the probable Super Bowl champion Detroit Lions.
We'll see.
We'll see how this season closes out for Anthony Richardson.
We'll see. He is more terrifying to me than the uncertainty of Michael Penix.
Yeah. There's a lot of uncertainty with Anthony Richardson. He still holds this tantalizing upside, which Theo's referring to, which is not incorrect. Yeah. If he does put it together.
Have you seen this guy run the ball, Jax?
Yes. He's very talented.
This is an NFL versus fantasy argument, and I think that you're both correct in the fact that Michael Penix has a little bit more wiggle room in terms of just stepping in, being a long-term starter. Richardson could go the way of a Justin Fields, where teams don't necessarily view him as a guy that you can use. You have to run a certain offense. Matt, Bingo. You talked about his you talked about his completion percentage. There's some red flags there, but I do think Anthony Richardson, again, we haven't seen him play a full season. He's 22 and a half years old. He's younger than Michael Penix considerably, who's 24. And it's a situation where I do think it's going to be, how does Indianapolis end the season? I think that going into next year, Anthony Richardson will be the starting quarterback in Indianapolis. It'll be year 3 for him, and hopefully a completely healthy offseason for him to get more acclimated in an NFL offense. So I understand the red flags, but I do think that there are some very positive signs for fantasy football where this guy can end up being a QB1 next year, and sort of you get him at a discount.
There's been a handful of quarterbacks drafted in the top 5 that came out at a very young age without putting up impressive numbers. Anthony Richardson was one. Can you think of one before him?
Well, Trey Lance.
Okay, well, Trey Lance is the natural comp for Anthony Richardson at this point. But someone that we've talked about today who came out very young, age 21, with underwhelming stats at USC is?
Sammy Darnold.
Sam Darnold. So actually, the correct comp for Anthony Richardson is some combination of Sam Darnold and Trey Lance. How about that? Isn't that gives him a little bit of upside in the future, right? That gives him hope that he could somehow turn it around in 6 years. So he's not a total epic bust like Trey Lance. If you give him that Franken comp that he's Sam Darnold and Trey Lance, then there's some hope that eventually he can go 11-2 and lead the Minnesota Vikings to the playoffs and win one game and then not get extended because Kevin O'Connell is a genius and he'll make whatever quarterback they have work.
And I think that's one thing where you sort of nailed it, Matt, with the Bo Nix success this year and frankly the Jaden Daniels success this year. These quarterbacks who have a ton of college starts under their belt are going to be sort of more in vogue for NFL teams heading into the NFL draft. And Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward are both guys who've started a ton of games. I think that people are going to be
This is where I was going.
Richardson thing. So
this is where I was going. This is the anti wide receiver age at draft trend, right? So with wide receivers, the earlier these guys declare, the better. Like the age at draft is actually more predictive of future success than the breakout age. With quarterback, I want these guys to go back. I want these guys to get maximum seasoning. I love that Penix was like, I'm going back and trying to win a championship with this team. I love that. In fact, it's a little bit of a red flag for J.J. McCarthy that he was so young coming out. It's like the only thing that he has that these other guys don't is he did win an NCAA championship. So he won the college football championship. He's like, what else? I can't say I want to go back and win a championship. I just did that. So if there's one reason to say, hey, I'm coming out, I'm doing this, I'm going to be a top 10 pick, I just won a championship, there's nothing, my coach is leaving, there's nothing left for me here. So less of a red flag than the super early declare from Darnold and Anthony Richardson. But I will say with J.J. McCarthy, the other thing is he put up like Sam Darnold numbers. He didn't put up the big counting stats, the big prolific numbers in college either. But still, not as concerning. Not as concerning. But the point is, Penix showing the leadership, the maturity, wanting to go back, fully seasoned. I mean, I think Jax and I are two of the most confident in his ability to really rise and be a true difference maker in fantasy as early as next year.
The Penix will rise.
Now, we also mentioned Ramondre Stevenson earlier. I think we should add Ramondre Stevenson to that group of the first veteran running backs that you're going to be in the market for in startups. Pollard and Stevenson. I think that those are 27-year-old running backs because Ramondre Stevenson older than people think. So I think that's the line. I think, can we establish that as, if you want to go ahead and avoid the Saquons and avoid the super expensive running backs, the Jahmyr Gibbs and Dynasty startups, and we're going wide receiver, Pollard and Stevenson feels like a good friction point to start compiling your running back roster.
Well, I think he's certainly going to be cheap. And Matt, we've talked about him where I sort of have the opinion that he's going to be a valuable guy next year as well, because they signed him this past offseason, and we've seen him have some very solid games right next to Drake May. And as this offense goes up, I think Ramondre Stevenson will also see his value rise with the team. So for me, Stevenson is a guy that it's not costing you anything but like sort of a RB3 value. And then when you add in this strong 2025 running back class, Stevenson is going to be a guy that's going to go behind maybe 6 or 7 of these guys in startups. So he's going to be even more. He's going to be even more of a discount once we get to post NFL draft dynasty startups. And I do think he's got another year next to Drake May. So I'm with you. I think Ramondre Stevenson, the consistency was not there this year, but we have seen multiple 20-point weeks, multiple usable weeks, and he's looked good next to Drake May. So the offensive line's got to get a little bit better. And I think Drake May's maturity, not turning the ball over as much next year, will also help Stevenson. Stevenson will just be a guy that sort of rises with the offensive success.
Patriots could reinvent this offense in a matter of weeks this offseason. And the big beneficiary that no one's talking about right now would be Ramondre Stevenson. Of them using their free agent dollars not necessarily on T. Higgins, but on offensive line, or them not drafting a wide receiver early and using it on offensive line. If they do choose to spend most of their money and their capital on O-line and wide receiver, that would not only create, a better environment for Drake May, but just more sustained drives, more touchdowns for Ramondre Stevenson. So I asked you earlier about ETN versus Najee Harris. Najee Harris, 26.8 years old. Ramondre Stevenson, 26.8 years old. Who you guys got, Stevenson or Harris?
Ask me in a couple months with this one, Matt, because I think Najee Harris might sign with somebody really good. Najee Harris as a Kansas City Chief. Najee Harris as, pick your poison team. I think that there's going to be teams that really value Najee Harris. I mean, we've seen it now multiple times. These running backs who play through injuries, are able to absorb volume, and have had multiple years of success. And you put it on top of the fact that these teams remember what they think of guys in the NFL draft process, and they keep it in like the back of their head. You see some of these inexplicable moves, and you say, why did this team go out and get this guy? And then some guy will say, well, we loved him like 4 years ago when we were valuing him in the draft. Even Kevin O'Connell with Daniel Jones. They go and get Daniel Jones after the Giants cut him, and apparently the Vikings really liked him when he was a prospect. So for me, it's like, I think Najee Harris will be more valuable than Ramondre Stevenson. But right now, if I don't know the landing spot, I'll take Stevenson.
I was going to say, actually, when you were talking about Ramondre, I was going to say Ramondre is the 2025 version of Najee in this past year, because it's the same thing. A good player on a, that the public is fading probably a little too far. And I think that's what, when you talk about running backs and startups next year, I haven't really even thought of it, to be honest with you. I am managing a lot of championship teams, bros. So my mind is totally right now as a dynasty is on two things. Number one is all of my playoff teams, I'm trying to maximize, my scoring for the rest of the season without giving up, premium draft capital. I'm very, very seldom selling first to get better, but I'm making some deals there. And then as my non-playoff teams, I'm looking at where are the fantasy points that are being scored right now, that when I fast forward to the startups in 2025, where they're not going to be quite as valuable at that point as they are right now, and selling off those pieces. You mentioned your FFPC drafts not having a trade deadline. Boy, I hate that shit, because as a non-playoff team, it really limits your upside to be able to rebuild, or not even rebuild. Look, Theo, you and I in the big game, eh? I mean, we just both made it in. What a freaking finish. You and I both made it into the playoffs there. But if either of us had gotten unlucky and not made the playoffs, we have two very good teams, and either of us could have not made it. You're not rebuilding, but at that very moment that you don't make the playoffs, your whole focus changes. No longer do you care about weeks 15, 16, and 17. You only care about making your team better for 2025. And as a dynasty player, those two inflection points are so vastly different in the behavior I'm going to take as a manager. So for me, that's where my mind is at. I'm looking at how can I leverage the current economy with the future economy and have those things pay me the difference.
And I think that you sort of nailed it. And I'll be interested to see what Matt has to say about this one. But I think that there is an argument to be made for a trade deadline or no trade deadline. And I like having leagues where there's a different thing there. But I will say, Jax, when you have a trade deadline in a dynasty league, that is one of the most active week-long periods and most exciting week-long periods. It's almost like you have the rookie draft, which is just incredible. You've got the startup, which is always exciting, beyond exciting. And then you have the trade deadline. And like in the FFPC, the amount of trade offers coming through when you're a volume guy like me, it makes the game really exciting. And the amount of moves I was able to accomplish towards the trade deadline, where in a league where there's no trade deadline, it spreads it out a little bit more.
I disagree. So I disagree wholeheartedly, because here's the thing: when you have a trade deadline, you don't know sometimes if you're a playoff team or not. Plain and simple. I backed my way into 2 or 3 playoff situations here this last week. Man, I made a playoff last night in a game I wasn't even involved in. I needed a certain team to lose, and they did, and it was amazing, and I got in. But if you'd asked me, do I think I'm going to make that playoff run? The answer was no. I don't think I'm going to get in. So I would have, with a trade deadline, I'd have to behave like a non-playoff team, and it turns out I am a playoff team. So why should I be forced to decide which way I'm going to play until I know my fate? I think that's not the way to go. I love no trade deadline. Let me figure out if I'm in the playoffs, and then I can either buy from a non-playoff team, or if I'm a non-playoff team, I get to transact as a non-playoff team. Trade deadlines are ridiculous. Get them out of here. It's not dynasty.
Most people agree with you. I like having a mix. I think most people agree with you. Like when I refer to even the FFPC trade deadline, I put like a post on X where I've written an article in years past. The true dynasty purists get very angry at the fact that they have like this trade deadline. Right. But Matt, where are you at on this one? Dynasty leagues with a trade deadline, dynasty leagues with no trade deadline. And I'll say this, there's also leagues where the non-playoff teams now are not allowed to trade. It's only trading within the playoff teams. That's another one I've seen. I've seen that in 1 or 2 places. So just
the hell, man. I would never be in that league. You wouldn't be able to drag me into that league for free. Get me out of here. This is only the playoff teams can trade with themselves.
No, that's
what is this, incest too? They have to
like
kiss your sister at the same time.
They require incest as well, Jax.
Okay, so
what is the take here, Podfather? Where are you
if trades are open right now in Dynasty, I'm trying to get the highest value handcuffs. Corum, Ray Davis, Jalen Wright, Kamani Vidal. I want these guys bad. And then I also want the running backs that I think are going to accrue value next year as they continue to smash in the fantasy playoffs. And even if I am not a playoff team, I want to get these guys because you can still get them at a low point. Tony Pollard and Ramondre Stevenson, we talked about some of these veteran running backs. Regarding the trade deadline, I'll take us out on this. You have the entire season to make moves, Jax.
No, you don't.
You have the entire season. You have January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, and even into December if you set the trade deadline at 1 o'clock on Sunday when the playoffs start and you simply don't allow for 3 weeks of the season trades during the playoffs where crazy one-sided deals can occur that flip the competitiveness of the playoffs, that completely change the texture of the matchups. And you had all season to accumulate fantasy points and win matchups and get seeding. And then the next thing you know, the guy you're facing just trades a draft pick to get a superstar that tilts the entire matchup against you. Why? Because he's more plugged into the chat for trading than you are. That doesn't seem fair to me. I am with Theo. I know it doesn't. I know. Right?
I'm I would like to clarify.
So you're upset having a matchup essentially completely skewed by a team that has no stake in the season left.
They have stake
and is simply punting assets.
Which
it's a suboptimal way to run a team. Just because you want those extra 3 weeks of transactions.
What's suboptimal?
You are a glutton for dynasty transactions, which I love. No. I love overactive dynasty players. Those are the best people. You don't want to be in some dormant league. You want to be in an overactive league. I want to be hyperactive as anyone does. But I think that we put the last 3 weeks of the season, the playoffs, the fantasy playoffs, on ice, and we don't allow any weird exchanges of players that the vast majority of people are going to be upset about, and you're creating unnecessary stress and tension on the league. Why for this extra 3 weeks that you didn't really need?
I have no idea what you just said. You basically are insinuating that there's going to be weird trades.
There are always weird trades when trade deadline is removed.
What's weird about them
in Dynasty?
Hold on. If I'm holding Tyreek Hill and I sell him to you for 2025 first, that's weird.
No, the problem is when you have players that are one level down from Tyreek Hill that are older, they get traded for a third rounder.
What trade?
He's saying that the Calvin Ridley for a third, the Tony Pollard for 2/3 type deal. Those sort of deals are
But why would I trade away Tony Pollard for 2/3? That's a bad trade. It's not a weird trade, it's a bad trade.
I would say that.
No, but my priority in Dynasty is to create an environment where there has to be no trade approval. I don't believe in voting on trades. I don't believe in commissioners getting involved in trades. I believe trades are wide open and they process instantly. And if you want to have that mechanism in place where there is no trade review, then the league is susceptible to having some completely imbalanced trades happening at a moment where all the money is going to be won and lost.
That's called collusion. That's different. Collusion is illegal, and
no, it's not. It's not even collusion. It's not even collusion.
What are you
It's
saying?
not even collusion, but the incentive structure can be tilted in such a way that it nullifies all the work that someone did for 15 weeks.
What about the work that I've done to make the playoffs while still holding on to assets that I can utilize at this time to actually make a move? I've been patient all year while you were spending all year and you have no more assets. I have assets. I'm going to spend them wisely on stuff that's going to help me right now. I'll give you another trade. Let's say that you're the CMC owner. You played everything perfect. You had Kareem Hunt and Jordan Mason take you to now, and you have CMC. You can't trade CMC for somebody? I can't trade CMC for Aaron Jones if I want. That's a weird trade for you. In my league, the Dynasty Game Theory Invitational, I just traded with Justin Boone, and it was a little bit unfair. He got an advantage of me. He's not in the playoffs. I traded CMC and Jordan Mason for David Montgomery and Grant Calcaterra. And what I had to do was give him a 2025 second to make that trade because he's not going to give him to me for nothing. So I leveraged CMC and a second for David Montgomery so I can win. Is that weird? Is that a bad thing? That's not a bad thing. That's a win-win deal. He wins because he gets the profit. He gets a good player going into 2025. I get production right now. And if you're crying in my league, then cry. But that's not weird, and that's not imbalance, and that's not taking advantage of anything that's not right. That's taking a playoff team and saying, why should I have to sit and lose with CMC, who I've lost for the year? It makes no sense. Let me transfer him into some production, and it's a fair trade for both sides. There's no collusion. As a matter of fact, if anything, he doesn't want me to win, so he pressed me hard for that extra second, which I did not want to give him, but I did because I want to win the league.
Jack's right. I changed my mind.
There we go.
Wrong. This is from the Podfather to you. I deeply appreciate you tuning in. And many ask, what can I do? What can I do to help support the hosts, the research they do, the production costs? Go to PlayerProfiler.com, Dynasty Deluxe, World Famous Draft Kit, Rankings, DFS Dominator, and of course, Data Analysis. Subscribe to any one of those, and you support all of us and take Player Profiler to the moon.